Thank you all so much for joining us for this virtual seminar. Tracing Family Roots Through German Words is a presentation on the etymology of the German language in a genealogical context. The first portion of this presentation will focus on the history of the German language and how vocabulary, grammatical, and phonological structures have shifted over the last several hundred years. The second part of this presentation will discuss tips for German genealogical research. We will learn about characteristics of the German language, familiarize ourselves with Old German scripts, and examine actual German genealogical documents and reference resources. We will also touch upon tips for researching German genealogy if you do not speak the language. So a little bit about myself. My name is Gabi, and I am the Youth Services Coordinator with the Allen County Public Library. I possess Bachelor of Arts degrees in English Language Studies and German Language Studies. I also have a Teaching English as a New Language Bachelor certification from a TESOL accredited program. I am currently in the last semester of my Master of Library and Information Sciences degree at San Jose State University, and I plan to graduate in December of this year. Regarding my German language experience, I have studied German both formally and informally for over 15 years. I am not technically a heritage speaker, but my mother's family was proud of their German heritage and encouraged me to informally learn the language at the age of 8. I was a member of the Fort Wayne German Children's Choir, or the Kinderchor, and formally began learning German at the age of 13. My great-great-grandfather was born in Lower Saxony, or Niedersachsen, and my great-great-grandmother was born in Rhineland-Pfalz, or Rhineland-Palatinate. I studied abroad in Graz, Austria, and plan to visit Germany in 2026. And currently, I use my German language skills at the Allen County Public Library by hosting bilingual German and English story times and providing translation assistance. Before we begin, I would like to provide a quick disclaimer that I recognize that my perspective may not be holistic in certain areas due to pedagogical limitations and time constraints. This slide depicts the books and other textual resources used in the creation of this presentation. Please note that some of these resources are in German, however, some of them are in English as well. This is a list of scholarly and contemporary virtual resources, and I would like to especially thank Allison Dupree-Singleton of the Allen County Public Library's Genealogy Center, the entire Allen County Public Library Genealogy Center, and Dr. Susan Roberts of Purdue University, Fort Wayne, for helping to inform this presentation through the provision of many textual resources. So thank you all so much. So here's an outline of today's presentation with approximate timestamps. We've already done our introduction, and so we're going to dive into part 1, which is the evolution of the German language. This will take us approximately 20 to 25 minutes. Part 2 is about researching German genealogy, and this will take about 20 minutes. So part 1. In order to understand what our genealogical texts say, we must first understand how the language came to be. The German language as we know it has evolved extensively to become what it is known as today. This section will provide a brief overview of how the German language has evolved from the Proto-Indo-European language to now, with a specific focus over the last 500 years. We're going to start from the very beginning, approximately 6,500 years ago, with the Proto-Indo-European language. The Proto-Indo-European language is a hypothetical proto-language system that was used between 4,500 BC and 2,500 BC. It is hypothetical because there are no surviving documents written in this language. The Proto-Indo-European language is believed to have predated writing systems, which first occurred during the Bronze Age around 3,200 BC. For this reason, you will obviously not possess any genealogical documents from this time period, and if you do, contact a museum. Due to the language having been spoken by many groups of people across wide regions, the language fractured into dialects, which evolved into languages of their own. The Proto-Indo-European language is the parent structure that became the Indo-European family of languages. The Proto-Indo-European language originated in what is known as Central Asia near Kazakhstan, through where is present-day Ukraine and Russia. The dark green portion of this map indicates the language's originating location, also known as the homeland. The light green portion indicates the spread of the language. So you'll notice that the language's influence spread across Europe, up through Russia, and then down all the way up into India. As stated by Waterman, so John T. Waterman wrote a book called A History of the German Language, published in 1966, and this is a fantastic resource that is written in English about German etymology. As stated by Waterman, the term Indo-European refers only to linguistic relationships and not ethnography, meaning all correlations and distinctions that we will discuss refer solely to language. Through time, the Proto-Indo-European language became the Indo-European family of languages, which is a collection of distinct groups of languages that evolved from one common language ancestor, the PIE, or Proto-Indo-European. Today, almost half of the entire global population speaks an Indo-European language as a first language, and this is according to Ethnologue 2025. There are between 7 and 12 recognized families of languages. These are Albanian, Armenian, Baltic, Celtic, Germanic, Greek, Hittite, Indic, Iranian, Italic, Slavic, and Tocharian. The modern German language originates from the Germanic family of languages. This language family includes widely spoken languages such as English, German, Dutch, Afrikaans, Yiddish, Swedish, Danish, Norwegian, and Icelandic. Before the Germanic family of languages, there was a single Germanic language preceded by a Proto-Germanic language, which first occurred around 500 BC. The exact date that Proto-Germanic and Germanic first occurred is unknown. However, it is likely to have first emerged approximately 500 BC and lasted until the 1st or 2nd century AD. The Germanic language is distinguished by its sound shifts. A sound shift is a distinct phonological sound change within a language demonstrated across users over time. We will first discuss the first Germanic sound shift, also known as Grimm's Law and Fanna's Law, next. The first Germanic sound shift is what distinguished Proto-Germanic from the Proto-Indo-European language. This sound shift was first noted by Danish philologist Ramus Rask in 1818. However, it was not widely adopted until 1822, when Jakob Grimm of the brothers Grimm studied the shift more closely and drew deeper correlations to its role in the evolution of the German language. This is when the first Germanic sound shift became synonymous with Grimm's Law. To put it simply, Grimm's Law is a three-part notion that describes the following changes. Number 1, Proto-Indo-European voiceless stops changed into Proto-Germanic voiceless fricatives. So for example, in the Proto-Indo-European word Pater, and I may be pronouncing this incorrectly, so I do apologize. Pater starts with that P sound, and that P is a voiceless stop consonant. This evolved over time to be the German word Vater, which is the English word father. So that P sound evolved into that voiceless fricative F over time. And this is just one example of that. Number 2, Proto-Indo-European voice stops became Proto-Germanic voiceless stops. An example of this is in the Proto-Indo-European word hedont, hedont. So that means tooth in Proto-Indo-European language, and it ends with that T sound. And that T is a voice stop consonant. This became a voiceless stop in Proto-Germanic and eventually to English, so the word tooth, that Th sound, that TH, is a voiceless stop. And number 3, Proto-Indo-European voiced aspirated stops became Proto-Germanic voice stops or fricatives as allophones. An example of this is in the Proto-Indo-European word dog. So that D has an H coloring. This means to burn. It evolved over time to, for example, the Gothic word for days, which is dogs, to that hard D sound. And so the information that's illustrated on this slide is taken from the German DTV-Atlas der Deutschen Sprache. So this is a language atlas of the German language. You'll notice that on the slide here, the black arrow line is Fanna's Law, and that goes from left to right. You'll notice that the blue square there is Indo-Germanic system, and then the orange squares are the Germanic system. So that's just what is displayed on this slide. There are also several other linguistic laws in addition to Grimm's Law. Fanna's Law, for example, clarifies that there are certain situations in which Grimm's Law does not apply. From the Indo-European family of languages stems the Germanic language, which over time became its own Germanic family of languages. The Germanic language evolved through various versions to become the German language that we understand today. Old High German, or Althochdeutsch, was spoken in the regions of southern Germany, western Austria, and Switzerland. The language was most likely used between 500 and 1050 AD, though this is an approximation. The characterizing factor that distinguishes the German language from other Germanic languages of this time is the Second German sound shift. This is also referred to as the High German consonant shift. Old High German was largely dialectal and was influenced heavily by monasteries and churches. All surviving texts in Old High German are religious in nature and were preserved by these clerical institutions. The Second Germanic sound shift, also referred to as the High German consonant shift, occurred in what is now known as the southern portion of Germany, likely between the 3rd and 5th century AD. The sound shift is what distinguishes High German from the Low Franconian and Low German dialects. The two primary characteristics of the Second Germanic sound shift are, number one, Proto-West Germanic's voiceless stop consonants change to fricatives and affricatives, and this is demonstrated on our slide here. This is another image from the DTV-Sprachatlas, and it shows some cities that are near Stuttgart, which is in like the southwestern part of Germany. So this example shows the P shift over time. The word Apfel of that time became Apfel, which is the word for apple in a modern German. The word Pflaum, eventually that P became that PF sound. So Pflaum is the word for plum, and then Pfund became Pfund. So that's the word for pound. And number two, pre-Old High German voice stop consonants became voiceless stop consonants. So as we say with the word apple, which became Apfel, this is different than in other Franconian languages such as English, Dutch, and Swedish. So the word Apfel in German, in English it's apple, in Dutch it's apple, and in Swedish it's apple. So that P sound never shifted in these other languages. Another example of the voice stop consonant becoming a voiceless stop consonant is in the word Wasser in German, which is water. And then in English, this word is water, in Dutch it's water or water, and then in Swedish it's vatten. So this is just another demonstration of how these stop consonants evolved over time. During this time period, writing was taught through monasteries and Christian churches. One of the most notable texts during this time period is the Admonito Generalis, which is a ruling document ordered by King Charlemagne in 789. Above is an image of the Wesselbrunn prayer, which is one of the oldest surviving documents written in Old High German. As you look at the Old High German version in comparison to the modern German translation, it is difficult to draw correlations between the texts, but not impossible. For example, if this first word up here under the title is dat, which ends with that T sound, this T evolved over time to be das in our modern German language. If you look at the images on the left, this is the Wesselbrunn prayer written in the 9th century. This first word on the last line of the first image on the left is Himmel. You'll notice that on the image on the right, Himmel is spelled in the modern German way. There are differences. So for example, nouns during this time period were not yet capitalized. If you're familiar with German, you'll know that the nouns are capitalized, but this didn't occur first until the 14th century and wasn't finalized through orthographical reforms until the 17th century. So we don't have that capitalization there. However, you'll also notice that there is only one M in this word. This is another orthographical change that came later. So you can kind of see that this writing is beautiful, handwritten. However, it is quite different from our modern German language of this time. Following Old High German came the Middle High German language form. Middle High German occurred from approximately 1050 to 1350 AD, which is during the medieval time period. From 1050 to 1170 AD marks the early Middle High German language period. Classic Middle High German occurred during a high literary period between 1170 and 1250 AD. At this time, knighthood and the concept of chivalry became increasingly prevalent. It was fruitful to be a Minnesänger, or a person who traveled, wrote, and performed heroic lyrical poetry. Rittersprache, or the language of the knights, became a popular dialect of the time, as it was considered to be polite. The concept of chivalry, through its prevalency, also shaped the language of this time period. The birth of the Minnesang, or medieval lyrical poem, opened doors for a literary explosion. In addition to Rittersprache was Dichtersprache, which is the language of the poets, which also occurred between the Middle and Late Middle High German periods. The conception of other forms of text also occurred during the Middle High German period, with prose also being noted to appear as early as the end of the 12th century. Above are images of a poem from one of the most renowned Minnesänger of all times, Walter von der Vogelweide. The poem is titled in English, I Sat on a Stone, or in Middle High German, Ich saß auf einem Steine, and it is written around 1200 AD. So you'll notice that the text font that's written on the left image, it is not a Fraktur script. This is more of an Antica or a black letter script. So Fraktur didn't come until around the 1500s, and we will get there. So this is 300 years before that. You'll also notice that this is a Middle High German on the right-hand side, like kind of a transcription in a Times New Roman font. And please note that the diacritics are different in these words. So the umlaut hasn't been introduced yet. It actually is introduced around this time, and we'll get to that on the next slide. But the language, it is pretty similar to, like, morphologically to the current modern German language. So I'll read this first 4 lines to you real quick and do a quick English translation. So, ich saß auf einem Steine, which means I sat on a stone, und dachte Bein mit Beine. I believe this says I thought, leg with leg, or, leg over leg, you could translate that as. Darauf saß ich den Ellenbogen. So Ellenbogen are your elbows. So there I sat with my elbows. Und ich hätte in meine Hand geschmogen, so I nestled my elbow in my hand is what I believe that this says. If you would like to hear it read in the Middle High German dialect, then you can absolutely get a copy of these slides, and linked in here is this poem being read aloud. So very interesting things to consider with this. So on this, the first chart is the umlaut. So as I stated, the umlaut became increasingly prevalent in the Middle High German language. By the 11th century, the umlaut spread across vowels and diphthongs, which you can see demonstrated on this chart. And chart number 2 indicates the number of written dialects during this time period. So notice the influence that occurred here. Up here in the kind of northwest region, you've got Mittelniederländisch. So Nederländisch is Dutch. And then we've got the Frankish kind of influence coming here. And you can see in the yellow, this is beginning to be where your Low German is. And then in the orange, it's your High German. So that is just something to kind of see how this evolved. And this is during the Middle Age time period. Following Middle High German is the Early New High German language form. Early New High German did not occur exactly between 1350 and 1600 AD. Some historical linguists do not characterize this period starting until 1400 or 1450 AD, while others believe it carried on until as late as 1750 AD. Characteristics of the early New High German language that distinguish it from Middle High German include short vowel sounds within open syllables were lengthened, long vowel sounds within closed syllables were shortened, long vowels in Middle High German were diphthongized in the early New High German, and certain Middle High German diphthongs were monophthongized to become long vowel sounds. The invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg in 1440 paved the way for Druckersprache, or the printing languages. Text could more easily and efficiently be created and distributed in formats that were accessible to common folk. The Fraktur typeface, which was invented in the early 16th century, will be discussed more in detail later, but this was a common font used during this time period. It should also be noted, however, that during this time, most of the works in Germany were still being published in Latin and printed in Latin. According to Waterman, as of 1570, 70% of works printed in Germany were in Latin. This lasted until the late 17th century. The 30 Years' War, though an incredible tragedy that brought much detriment to the German language and population, introduced many military terms into the German lexicon. In terms of the Black Death, there is a theory that the great vowel shift that occurred in the English language, not to be confused with the High German consonant shift, was partially caused as a result of this tragedy. So a lot of very interesting theories there. The map on this slide demonstrates the areas in which German was spoken between 1000 and 1880 AD. It is possible to see the influence that German had as it kind of influenced out eastward. You'll see that we have, Austria down below in this darker ink image here, and then as it moves over, it's got more of the influence going eastward. As stated previously, Christianity and its religious influence largely shaped the evolution of the German language. Martin Luther was a prominent figure during this time period. Following the period of Reformation, Martin Luther published his translation of the Bible in 1534. His Bible was published using the Fraktur typeface. The image above shows a page from the book of Genesis, the first page from his Bible. Next to it is the text typed out using a modern typeface, and then below it is an English translation in modern English. So as you look here, you'll notice that the word Himmel is used again. However, it is different, this last E. So 300 years later, we have this E at the second to last letter. Previously, it was an I in our Wesselbrunn prayer. So this is 500 years later, we're seeing it, the German language process to be more familiar with the modern German language that we understand today. So the noun capitalizations, we don't see that yet. The word Gott, so God, is capitalized, but it is fairly easy once you get past the Fraktur script and you transcribe that. It's pretty easy to kind of understand word from word. We have now successfully traveled through over 6,000 years of German etymology and linguistic evolution. We have seen the beginnings of German as it stemmed from the Proto-Indo-European language, then distinguished itself in the Indo-European family of languages. From Old High German to Middle High German to New High German, also known as Modern German, we have now learned how and why the German language has evolved to become what it is today. The New High German language period occurred between approximately 1600 and 1650 AD and continues through to today. Martin Luther's Reformation work and the work of the grammarians helped to promote the usage of German and distinguish the language from Latin, French, and other Western Germanic forms. During this time period, the German language did not undergo any major phonological or morphological changes like what occurred during the 15th and 16th centuries or before. The possession of German grammatical and literary knowledge was highly valued during this time period, and the rise of the Schriftsprache, or the written language, shaped this era. Similar to language forms of past time periods, New High German was largely affected by societal changes. As the era of industrialization began and more technical inventions were created, the German language had to evolve to describe these occurrences. So this is an image of literary periodization. So the linguistic influences that occurred between 1600 AD and 18 to 1900 AD are exponential. Changes in the German language that occurred during this period grapple with the style and philosophy. The language above lists the names and approximate dates of characteristic literary periods that occurred during this New High German time period. So when researching genealogy, there can be some benefits to knowing the literary periodization of when a document was written, because this shows the cultural context, and it can also show that how these periods uniquely contributed to the German vocabulary over time. So we are now going to get into some actual genealogical documents to look at. So this is very exciting. The following two examples that we are going to look at are sourced from an actual Zivilstandregister. So this is a civil registration from Bavaria, Germany in 1807. This and the next image were sourced from the Family Search database. You will notice that in this first example, it is typed in the traditional Fraktur typeface. The next example will be written in Kurrent, and that is another script that we will discuss. So here you'll notice that the above text features the royal seal and the phrase "Im Rahmen seiner Königlichen Majestät," and this translates "on behalf of His Royal Majesty." So this is just kind of a transcription there. We've gone from the Fraktur to German, and we'll discuss in a little bit about how you might need to start with transcribing a document before you immediately go to translating it. On here, we have an image of a handwritten message. This is from the same Zivilstandregister. When doing genealogical research, it is important to be familiarized with both the typed and the written forms of writing styles. Do not feel discouraged if you don't speak German but have German heritage that you would like to research. Although it takes time, there are several tools that we will discuss that can help in kind of processing these documents. So again, all of these translations and transcriptions were done by me to the best of my abilities. So there may be some discrepancies, and I would love to be notified if anyone notices, just let me know. So this is believed to say, an den Provinz Magistrat der Königs Bayerischer Stadt Augsburg. So this is basically what it stands for or means, translated into English, is to the provincial magistrate of the Royal Bavarian city of Augsburg. And Augsburg was a hub for printing during this time period. You'll notice that the word Bayerischer is spelled differently than how it is in modern German today. It's spelled with an I instead of a Y, and this is due to the spelling of German being processed over time. So we're going from 1807 to briefly talking about orthographical reforms known as Rechtschreibung. There was a big one that occurred in 1996. So although this in 1996, the Rechtschreibung reform was not the first orthographical reform that occurred in the German language, it is one of the most notable and recent. There was also one that occurred in 2006. So the reform encompassed the following areas of capitalization, joined and separate words, hyphenated spelling, punctuations, and hyphenation at the end of a line. So on this slide, we have listed each of these changes as well as an example of the change. In 1996, it was decided that the S set, so if you notice the letter that is an S, it looks like a capital B, but it's actually two S's that are combined. This was decided to only appear after long vowels and diphthongs. This encompassed over 90% of the word changes during this movement. Double consonants were also added after certain words with short vowel sounds. With capitalization, one of the aims of the 1996 reform was to clarify capitalization. This is demonstrated in the second row on the table above. Some of the changes were reverted in 2006, but most stayed the same. So as you see here, the second example here, zur Zeit, is zur is to the or to, and then Zeit is time. And the word in, so this previously, prior to the reform, was just two separate words. However, they were combined into one compounded word without the capitalization after this reform. Regarding separable and compound words, there were some words that were separated and some words that were compounded. There were also words that had hyphens added and subtracted, and the way that syllables were stressed also changed during this reform. So English and then English is an example of this word syllable change. So we've made it through part one. The second part of the presentation will help to apply the information that we've discussed in the first part through the provision of more textual examples and resources. For individuals who are unfamiliar with the German language but have German heritage that they would like to research, there are several factors pertaining to modern German grammar and vocabulary that should be kept in mind. There are a few distinct characteristics that offset German from English and other German languages. Some of the characteristics are not found in English, but may be unique concepts to some individuals. There are 4 case systems, for example, in German, which are nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive. Noun articles and pronouns can change depending on the grammatical case that is used within a sentence. For compound words, the German language is characterized by its extensive usage of compound words. Nouns, verbs, and adjectives can all be compounded in German, certain examples of this. So here are a few examples. For a noun that is compounded, the word turtle is the word Schildkröte. So this is a combination of 2 words. The word Schild means shield, and the word Kröte means toad. So a shielded toad, so die Schildkröte. An example of a compounded verb is aufstehen, which is the word to stand up. The word auf in this context means up, and then stehen is the infinitive of to stand. So this word compounded means to stand up. And then for a compounded adjective example, you could have rothhaarig. So rothhaarig means red-headed. The color red is the word rot, and then haarig in this example means to be haired or red-haired. For noun capitalizations, in German, nouns are always capitalized. As I mentioned briefly, the first instance of this occurring was around the 14th century AD, and it did not become a grammatical pillar until the 17th century. The rule was eventually sealed through German orthographical reforms. In English, we only capitalize proper nouns and nouns at the beginning of a sentence. For noun gender, in German, nouns have one of three genders: masculine, feminine, and neuter. Nouns in German are accompanied by coinciding articles. The nominative articles are der, which is masculine, die, which is feminine, and das, which is neuter. Nouns will always maintain their grammatical gender, but the article will change depending on the case. In letters with umlauts, as discussed in the section on linguistics, modern German has 3 umlauted letters and 1 Sz, so that capital B-looking letter is actually 2 S's that are combined into 1 letter. The umlauted letters are A, O, and U with the 2 dots over them, which is a diacritic, and these letters often simply occur alongside other letters, and they themselves don't have special meanings. However, there are some cases that you may find umlauted letters added to words. So in the case of a plural, one example of this is the word mouse. So M-A-U-S, and then Mäuse is you just umlaut the A and add an E to the end, and this is mice. Superlatives are another example. So strong and stronger, you could have stark, and then add an A with an umlaut. The umlauted A is stärker. In old German genealogical documents written prior to orthographical reforms or depending on style and region, you may find that umlauted letters are replaced with letters lacking a diacritic and followed by the letter E. So in the example of Käse, which means cheese, you would have K-A-E-S-E instead of that umlauted A. And then for sentence structure, German sentence structure is very formulaic, but there are aspects and different triggers that will send words to the end of a sentence. So certain helping verbs, known as modal verbs, will send the infinitive verb to an end of a sentence. There are certain prepositions as well that will send all verbs to an end of the sentence, such as wenn, which means when, ob, which means whether or if, and then das, which means that. These are all examples of words that will automatically send verbs to the end of a clause or sentence. And then with words in present perfect tense, these often start with a GE and end with a T or an EN. So this is like a past tense example, like ich bin 2 Kilometer gelaufen means I have run 2 kilometers, but that run is sent to the end of that sentence. Dialectical differences are stark in German language history. Typically, you can kind of really vastly group dialects into 2 major sections, which is Hochdeutsch or High German and Plattdeutsch or Low German. High German is historically spoken in the southern parts of Germany, while Low German was spoken in the mountainous northern regions. Dialects are very different across German-speaking countries. Not very different. They differ across regions and countries. So Austrian German will be different from Swiss German, which will be different from German spoken in different parts of Germany. So when researching German genealogical documents, you may have questions pertaining to dialect or word choice. So these can be very helpful to utilize a resource that can help you with certain dialect differences. And we'll discuss a resource for this. So similarly to dialects, colloquialisms are generally products of the spoken language. However, so you wouldn't necessarily see a colloquialism in a birth, marriage, or a death record. However, if you're looking at, a family note, like a love letter, for example, this could encounter that. So an excellent tool to utilize when researching your German heritage is the German genealogical word list, which is provided by Family Search. This is a great resource for non-German speakers who are interested in researching their heritage, as it clarifies differences between German and English and provides lists of both languages. So in this section, we're going to discuss the 3 most common scripts in German fonts that you may encounter in your research. And again, we're not discussing the black letter font because this was kind of replaced by Fraktur. So Fraktur schrift or the Fraktur script or font, first originated around the early 16th century, created by Hieronymus André for Emperor Maximilian I. Fraktur printing was popularized by a publisher from Augsburg, Germany, named Johann Schönspringer. And a sample text on this slide has been sourced from a birth registration from the city of Augsburg between 1818 and 1875. The birth registration was accessed using the Family Search database. So on this slide, you'll see the original text scan at the top, followed by transcription, and then the English translation done to the best of my abilities. What you see here are headings for each column of the birth registration, and then the individual's name entry would be listed under each line, and we'll have an example of this in the next slide. This is one example of many of the different types of documents that you may research. So here, you'll notice that we have entries for the name of the child, the type of birth, and the name of the birth helper or midwife. We have the name of the father and his surname. We also have the status and religion of the father, the district court, residence, place, and house number of the family, the name of the mother with maiden name, and the status and religion of the mother. So once you get the hang of reading Fraktur as you go into your research, it can be pretty easy eventually, as you gain that skill to read these scripts. However, with handwriting, it can get a little more challenging, but it's certainly not impossible. So as Fraktur is the name of the typeface popularized in German printing between the 16th and 20th century, Kurrent is a cursive writing style that was also written by individuals of this time period. So the text example here is the same birth registration from the previous example with the same headings of each column. However, it has a sample entry listed below. Reading Kurrentschrift, just an aside, it can be challenging, like reading any type of cursive in any language, English or another. Each individual has their own handwriting style. There are some characteristics of this script, such as the rightward lean to the letters, as well as certain lowercase and uppercase letters. And there is a fantastic resource, which is a language primer that we'll discuss in our resource section that can help you in transcribing both Kurrent, Fraktur, and then even Zitterlinschrift. So here we have information for Johann Gottlieb Karl, and he is the son of Wendelin Dosner. It is seen here that his birth helper, I was not able to transcribe her first name with certainty. However, I do believe her last name was Heiserin. So if you get in an instance where you're unable to transcribe the entire thing, you can still use it as a stepping stone with whatever you have. For the religion, this was also difficult to transcribe. However, it is believed in this kind of second word here on that entry that the family was Catholic. They lived in Augsburg at house number 117, and the mother's name was Maria Johann Dosner. And you can see here there is a GEB with a period. This stands for geboren, so this indicates what her maiden name is, and her maiden name is Schweiderer. So in your research, even if you don't know exactly what a word means, there are other different materials that you can utilize and reference that can help you to gain this information. So the final script that we are going to discuss is Zitterlinschrift, and this is a simplified version of the Kurrentschrift that we looked at previously in the previous slide. It was named after Ludwig Zitterlin, and it was popularized during the 20th century. It's the last and most recent version of the Kurrentschrift, and it was officially introduced into Prussian schools in 1915. It's characterized by its rounded ligatures, letter style, and character spacing. An excellent resource to utilize in learning about Zitterlinschrift is a website, and all of these examples and reference resources will be given to you on my slides, and you will have access to them, so don't worry. It is a fantastic website. It is a German website, but it is there is a page in English. So this is called zitterlinschrift.de, and it is fantastic. I will give you guys a link to this. This excerpt here is taken from a letter from a teacher to a school authority written in 1928. The German transcription is written below, and then there is an English translation written under that. So now that we've familiarized ourselves with the German etymology, script varieties, and aspects of the modern German language, we'll move forward into discussing the methodology and resources that can be applied into your research. So one of the very first and arguably most important aspects to discuss regarding genealogical research in another language is the difference between transcription and translation. So transcription is when one converts information within a single language. However, translation is the process of converting text from one language to another. There are several online translation resources that you can use to aid in your research. However, they should be vetted. So the first example I have is DeepL, which is currently one of, if not the world's most accurate translator. It's a model that's powered by artificial intelligence. And I say, use this with caution. Artificial intelligence is very new. It is not all knowing, obviously it can make mistakes. So these tools are not end all be alls, but they can be very helpful. Another tool is Google Translate. And the reason I mention this is because if you have the application on your phone, you can take a scan of a photo and it can overlay what it believes is the translation. It can do it with handwriting and so on and so forth. However, this does need to be vetted, but it can help you as a stepping stone if you're stuck, if you've looked at other reference materials and you still need that information. So these are a couple of tools that you can utilize. This slide lists several resources that may help you in navigating your research. This list is not all-encompassing, but it should provide a solid starting point. If you are local to Fort Wayne or planning to visit the Genealogy Center in the near future, you will have the opportunity to browse the Ancestry, Family Search, and MyHeritage databases. The Genealogy Center is a partner with Family Search, and so they have access to these databases in a way that might only be accessible through a paid subscription at home. I also have web resources here. So these are some great articles about starting your genealogical research journey in German. And there are several testaments written by people who have successfully researched their German ancestry who do not speak German, and you can too. So previously in the Kurrentschrift slide, there was a resource that I recommended. And before I get into the ones on the slide, I would just like to recommend Wittes Deutsch und Englisch Schreib- und Lese-Fibel. And this is a primer. So this is in English, the title is in German, but in English, it's the Witter's German English Writing and Reading Primer for American Independent Schools. This is a fabulous resource in German text and handwriting transcription. It has several examples, several charts that you can utilize. So this is a wonderful resource. But in addition to that, I've got 2 other handwriting books, as well as 3 genealogical material resources that I'll discuss. So in addition to the primer, there are 2 books that I would like to highlight about German handwriting and document transcription. The first book is titled Deciphering Handwriting in German Documents, Analyzing German, Latin, and French Historical Manuscripts. This was written by Roger P. Minert. So all of the following titles are able to be accessed in person at the Allen County Public Library's Genealogy Center. The page that I decided to scan for this slide shows a military document. This is an actual military document, and it has the transcription directly on the following page. So this is pages 160 and 161, I do believe, and it has that transcription directly there in a Times New Roman font. So you can do a one-for-one comparison through this book. It also has other tips. And this book is by the author Kathryn Schober, and she is a widely known and highly regarded German and English genealogy speaker, writer, and translator. She specializes in Old German document translation and has written several books on her work. Schober also offers courses to learn more about German genealogical document translation. In her book, Tips and Tricks of Deciphering German Handwriting, A Translator's Tricks of the Trade for Transcribing German Genealogy Documents, Schober dives into her methodology and offers tips, directions, and diagrams to supplement this information. The second image on this slide depicts the differences between the letters E, N, M, and R written in Kurrentschrift. So you can see here that these letters are quite similar in how they are written. And so this is just another testament to why it is good to have a key, for example, when you are doing your transcriptions. So here we are going to move into actual genealogical reference examples. So these are examples similar to like your Zivilstandregister, your birth register, and that kind of thing. So these are reference books that you can utilize. You want just a handful of a variety that you can utilize in your research. So church registrations or Kirchenbücher, these are church records that are incredibly common in German genealogical research and can be found for many German cities and towns. The above example is titled Kirchenbuch Michelstadt, which is from the years 1623 to 1775. And it's a church registration for Michelstadt in the state of Hesse in Germany. So this information was compiled by Heidi Banse, and you may notice that this book, though denoting information from the 17th and 18th centuries, it's written on this fine, bright white paper in a legible font. And this is to show you that if you're not familiar with these types of anthologies, there are entities who process this information into these readable, more easily accessible books. So you will most likely still, find a lot of your records and information for your families on databases, and digitally. However, if you visit the Allen County Public Library's Genealogy Center, for example, you may be able to search for your information within a volume such as this. So also, briefly, real quick, this book also in it had family names, spouse names, and the dates in which marriages occurred. Familienbücher, or family registrations, are another fantastic resource that you may choose to utilize. So as defined by genealogist Maggie Hein, a family registration is a resource that lists basic genealogical information such as birth, marriage, and death dates for every family in a certain town or peerage within a given amount of time. The Familienbücher system was standardized in 1938 for civil records. Slide is for Godelau, which is another city in the state of Hesse. This is for the years of 1635 to 1913. It is volume 1, so it contains A through L, the first half of the alphabet. In addition to birth, marriage, and death dates, it also specifies birth location, birth and death times, if known, occupation, and information about widows. So while not every town may have an accessible Familienbuch that covers the exact span of time for your research, it's just good to know that these exist. And finally, our last resource to look at is the lexicon. So this is an example of a lexicon. This is for the Meyers Orts- und Verkehrslexikon des Deutschen Reichs, which is a place and traffic lexicon. And the page scanned is for a city in North Rhine-Westphalia, which is called Bochum. And it shows the streetcar paths and routes. It shows the bus routes, and it has abbreviations of signs within the town. And so if you think back to our civil registration with Johann Gottlieb Karl and how it had an address, you could then use a lexicon, for example, if it has the information that you're looking for, and possibly see where, that address was, what the street signs surrounding it could have looked like. If it was of this time period where there was the streetcars, you could see what routes they might have taken, and so on and so forth. So these are wonderful resources that can help you to even further your research. And if you would like to learn more about your family's history, regardless of whether your heritage is German or that of another country, please visit the Allen County Public Library's Genealogy Center. And thank you all so much for listening to this presentation on the history of the German language and how it coincides with genealogical research. If you have any questions at all that aren't answered after this presentation, feel free to email me directly. You can also call the Genealogy Center to schedule your appointment to start learning more about your family. So thank you all so much for listening, and I look forward to hearing any questions that you have.
Thank you so much. We do have some questions for you. So our first one is, somebody mentioned the screen where you had some books and blogs that you used. It might have been near the beginning of your presentation, if you wouldn't mind going back to that slide real quick.
Absolutely. Let me see here. So yes, this is a list of the textual resources, some of them that I utilized. So the images were from the Deutsche Sprache Sprachatlas, which is the second book there from Ferner König. This was written, the copy that I'm borrowing is from the 1970s. However, there is a newer version from, I think, 2011 that you may be able to access. There's also, so a lot of this information was taken from the Waterman text, A History of the German Language, and also the other. So basically, the top 4 books were referenced a lot. And then that primer that I discussed with you guys is this bottom resource right here, which is the Witters one.
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, and it looks like they're asking for the next slide as well, if you don't mind
Oh, yeah,
paging over one
definitely.
too. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And then our next question, they're asking, what is the source for the maps showing the language changes? Where did you find those?
So yes, those were from, I'm gonna real briefly pan back to the first, this last slide, but then I'll go right back to this one. So this second book here by Ferner König, the Sprachatlas, it's a German language atlas. So this is where I sourced the maps. They are actual scans from a book. So those are from a book. Also, there was a map from like the 1000 to 1880, that 900-year span of German etymology shifts. And this was from the first book there by Astrid Stidje. And then let me go back to that other one.
And then our next question, someone's asking, where's the best place to look for the family and town registration books? They say they're in California, so they're not near us here.
Okay, so I would recommend for those, I would honestly start, and this is just me, I would probably start with where your family is from, like that part of Germany, for example, and seeing if there's any publishers in that town who have these Familienbücher, who are creating these. But I'm not positive if there might be some online. However, what you'd first need to know is the name of your family, the time period that you're looking for, and then the place in Germany that they lived.
Thank you. And then it looks like we might have one more that popped into the chat. And they're wondering, would you know if the Danish language of the mid-1800s is comparable to German? Would they have understood each other?
That is a good question. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that the Danish language was too far different from the German language during that 1800s time period. Maybe, a couple hundred years back, there could have been some more similarities, but my inclination is that they wouldn't have been the same or similarly understood. But that is a great question. These are all fantastic questions.
Thank you. And I see one more that popped in here. It says, how did the German language change for those that migrated to Russia? Is this similar to how English changed in America?
Ooh, that's a fabulous question. So to that, I actually am not sure. So I will just say I'm not positive in how the German language evolved in Russia, but I would love to research that. So I am just as curious as you are, but I unfortunately don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, and you're welcome to send us an email. Our email is genealogy@acpl.info, and we can try to dig a little further into that question. So,
Yeah.
let's see. So I think that'll finish us up for questions today. I did stick our email in the chat there, so if you'd like a copy of the chat, if you have any more questions, or if you'd like a copy of Gabi's slides, shoot us an email and we will get that to you. So thank you so much, Gabi, for presenting for us today, and thank you to everybody for attending. All
Thank
right.
you all so much. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye. You too.
Thank you.